Okay, so, we always ask you to send in stuff that's got you thinking, and you definitely delivered this time.
You guys sent in a whole bunch of stuff about fear.
Yeah, a document called pathtocourage.pdf.
Mm-hmm.
And I gotta say, it really got me thinking about all the ways fear kind of sneaks into our lives.
Yeah.
You know,
Oh, absolutely. It's everywhere, isn't it?
like it's not always the big obvious stuff like fear of heights or spiders.
Right. It's more like those subtle anxieties that hold us back from actually going after what we want.
Exactly. And that's what we want to really dive into today with this Path to Courage document.
Yeah, let's break it down and see if we can pull out some actual strategies to, start tackling those fears head on.
Awesome. So the document jumps right in and makes this really interesting distinction right off the bat.
Between healthy fear and unhealthy fear.
Yeah, which I thought was fascinating because we often think of fear as just this like bad thing.
Right, something to avoid at all costs.
But the document makes a really good point that, sometimes fear can actually be helpful.
Oh, totally. Like, think about it if you're walking down a dark street and you hear footsteps behind you.
Oh, yeah, that little jolt of fear that makes you turn around and check your surroundings.
Exactly. That's healthy fear kicking in. It's like a built-in alarm system keeping you safe.
Makes sense. And the document actually gives a more everyday example, too.
It talks about someone who decides to quit smoking after a health scare.
Right. So that fear of the potential consequences actually motivates them to make a positive change.
Exactly. And that's the key, isn't it? That healthy fear can actually be a catalyst for growth.
Totally. But then there's the flip side.
The unhealthy fear.
Yeah. And that's where things get a little tricky.
Because that's the kind of fear that really starts to mess with our lives.
Yeah, it's that persistent anxiety about things we can't control or things that aren't even real threats.
Like worrying about what other people think of you all the time, or constantly imagining worst case scenarios.
Right. Or being afraid to try new things because you're so fixated on the possibility of failure.
That kind of fear, it just keeps us stuck in a rut, prevents us from reaching our full potential.
And the document goes on to list a whole bunch of really negative effects of this unhealthy fear.
Like it can zap your energy, drain your motivation, even mess with your sleep.
And over time, it can really start to chip away at your self-confidence and your sense of self-worth.
It can even lead to physical symptoms like headaches and digestive problems.
And one of the most insidious things about this kind of fear is that it often disguises itself as something else.
Like procrastination.
Yeah, we might tell ourselves, oh, well, I'll get to that later. But deep down, it's really fear that's holding us back.
Or we might overwork ourselves trying to avoid facing our fears.
Or we might numb ourselves with things like food or alcohol or social media.
It's like we're trying to distract ourselves from those uncomfortable feelings, but in the long run, it just makes things worse.
So the document's really clear that if we want to live a more fulfilling life, we got to tackle this unhealthy fear head on.
Okay, so how do we actually do that?
Well, the document suggests starting with a really simple but powerful exercise.
Writing down our fears.
Yeah, it sounds almost too basic. But the idea is to actually get those fears out of our heads and onto paper.
Because once they're written down, we can start to examine them more objectively.
Right, instead of letting them swirl around in our minds and grow bigger and scarier than they really are.
Exactly. And the document gives some really helpful prompts for this exercise.
Like asking yourself, what am I afraid of right now?
Or what's the worst that could happen?
And even, what evidence do I have to support this fear?
Often when we really examine our fears, we find that they're based on assumptions or beliefs that aren't actually true.
Or we realize that the worst case scenario isn't really that bad after all.
But even after we've identified our fears, it can still be tough to know what to do about them.
Right, and the document acknowledges this. It says that even after we've done all this inner work, we can still find ourselves stuck in that same old pattern of fear and avoidance.
So it introduces this concept of the 5% statement as a way to break through that inertia and start taking action.
Yeah, I love this idea. It's all about making small incremental changes that feel manageable and less overwhelming.
Because let's face it, trying to overhaul our entire lives overnight is a recipe for burnout and overwhelm.
Totally. So the 5% statement is basically a way to ask ourselves, if I were to be 5% braver today, what would I do?
And then you fill in the blank with a specific action step that you can take right now.
Like if you're afraid of public speaking, maybe your 5% statement is, if I were to be 5% braver today, I would sign up for that Toastmasters class.
Or if you're afraid to ask someone out on a date, maybe your 5% statement is, if I were to be 5% braver today, I would strike up a conversation with that person at the coffee shop.
The key is to keep it small and achievable, something that you can actually follow through on.
And the document emphasizes the importance of consistency doing something every day, even if it's just a tiny step to move you in the direction you want to go.
Because over time, those small actions really add up and you start to build momentum.
And as you start to see progress, you also start to build confidence, and that can fuel even more action.
And alongside the 5% statement, the document also suggests another really powerful technique.
Making a list of the price and the benefits of staying stuck.
Yeah, this one can be a little uncomfortable, but it's super effective.
The price list is all about getting really honest with ourselves about the negative consequences of not facing our fears.
Like, what opportunities are we missing out on? What are we sacrificing in our lives?
And how is our fear impacting our relationships, our health, our overall well-being?
It's about really laying out the cost of inaction in black and white.
And then there's the benefits list, which can be even more revealing.
Because sometimes there are actually hidden perks to staying stuck.
Like maybe we get sympathy or attention from others when we complain about our problems.
Or maybe we're afraid of success and the changes that it might bring.
Or maybe we're simply comfortable with the familiar, even if it's not making us happy.
So by making these lists, we can start to understand the complex web of motivations that are keeping us trapped in our fears.
And once we've done that, we can start to make more conscious choices about how we want to move forward.
So we've talked about the importance of identifying our fears and taking action, but the document also delves into some powerful mental techniques that can help us overcome fear from the inside out.
Yeah, like affirmations.
Right. Affirmations are basically positive statements that we repeat to ourselves to reprogram our subconscious minds.
The idea is that by consistently feeding our minds with positive thoughts, we can start to shift our beliefs and our emotional responses.
And the document gives some great tips for creating effective affirmations.
Like making them personal and specific to your own fears and goals.
And phrasing them in the present tense as if they're already true.
Like instead of saying, I want to be confident, you would say, I am confident.
And another tip is to visualize yourself actually embodying those qualities or achieving those goals.
Because the more vividly you can imagine it, the more real it becomes in your mind.
And the document also cautions against the common trap of subconscious resistance.
Because our minds can be pretty stubborn, and they don't always want to let go of old beliefs, even if they're not serving us.
So it suggests framing affirmations as choices rather than absolute truths.
Like instead of saying, I am calm, you might say, I choose to feel calm.
And another tip is to focus on the gradual transformation.
Like saying, I am becoming more confident each day.
And the document also suggests using technology to your advantage.
Like listening to recorded affirmations or guided meditations.
Because sometimes it's easier to absorb those positive messages when they're coming from an external source.
And then the document takes things a step further with self-hypnosis.
Yeah, this one might sound a little woo-woo, but it's actually a really powerful technique for accessing and reprogramming our subconscious minds.
And the document emphasizes that it's a safe and natural state that we all experience to some degree every day.
Like when we get lost in a good book or a movie, or when we're driving on autopilot.
Those are all examples of light hypnotic states.
And self-hypnosis is basically a way to intentionally induce that state so that we can communicate directly with our subconscious minds.
And the document provides some simple techniques for doing this.
Like progressive relaxation, where you systematically tense and release different muscle groups.
Or visualization, where you create a vivid mental image of a peaceful and relaxing scene.
And once you're in that relaxed state, you can start to plant positive suggestions in your subconscious mind.
Like replacing negative beliefs about yourself with more empowering ones.
Or visualizing yourself successfully navigating those situations that you fear.
And the document also suggests using self-hypnosis to uncover the root causes of your fears.
Because sometimes our fears are connected to past experiences or traumas that we're not even consciously aware of.
And by bringing those experiences to the surface, we can start to heal them and release their hold on us.
So overall, the document makes a really compelling case that we have far more power over our fears than we might realize.
It's not about eliminating fear altogether, because as we've discussed, some fear is actually helpful.
It's about understanding the different types of fear, recognizing the ones that are holding us back, and then using a combination of action steps and mental techniques to move forward.
And the document emphasizes that this is an ongoing process.
It's not a one-time fix, but a commitment to continuously challenge those fears and expand our comfort zones.
And the more we do that, the more confident and resilient we become.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into path to courage.pdf, What's the one thing you want listeners to take away from this?
That's a good question. I think the biggest takeaway is that fear doesn't have to control our lives.
Yeah, we have the power to choose how we respond to it.
And there are so many tools and techniques available to help us overcome our fears and create the life we want.
And I think it's important to remember that courage is not the absence of fear.
It's about feeling the fear and doing it anyway.
Yeah, it's about taking those small steps even when it feels uncomfortable.
And trusting that we have the strength and the resilience to handle whatever comes our way.
So I encourage all of you listening to really consider which of the strategies we've discussed resonated most with you.
And then take that first step, even if it's just a tiny one, towards facing your fears and creating a more fulfilling life.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. And until next time, stay curious, keep exploring, and remember, you've got this.
See you next time.